Why tell stories? Everyone may have their own reasons, but for students of the ancient world, storytelling played an important part in early rhetorical training. In the last video in this series, we talked about fables, which were often the first storytelling exercise students practiced on their way to rhetorical greatness, but from there, students commonly moved on to exercises in narrative.
Yeah, I know, everyone knows.
Well, okay. You did say that you learned the Progymnasmata firsthand, so would you like to tell us what you learned?
No, all I'm saying is you're doing all this talking when I have actual experience. It's just that it would have been nice to have been asked.
Oh, well, would you like to talk about narrative then?
Oh, absolutely not.
Well then, at first you might think that fables already are narratives, so what's the difference? I mean, that's kind of what I thought. And it's not like the fable isn't a narrative genre, but the two work in different ways and for different purposes. As Nicolaus the Sophist puts it, after fable should come narrative, as being more argumentative than fable, but simpler than all the other exercises. And if we remember that fables are imaginary stories, usually about animals that teach some kind of lesson, narratives, again according to Nicolaus, come in three major flavors. Mythical are those not worthy of unquestioned belief and having a suspicion of falsehood, like stories about the Cyclopses and centaurs. Historical narratives are concerned with ancient events that are admitted to have happened, and pragmatic or judicial are things said in public debates. We could squabble about the relationship between fables and narratives all day, but to keep it simple, fables are short, made-up stories that teach little social or moral lessons, while narrative in this context takes on more forms and more expansive meaning in relation to history, culture, and politics. In fact, if you want to see the kind of practical purpose for storytelling that ancient students might have been training for, you can check out the video from a good while ago about the death of Eratosthenes, a speech written by the Greek teacher Lysias about a man who ended the mortal sojourn of Eratosthenes because Eratosthenes was up to no good with his wife. I'll link it at the end of the video, but it's a legal defense that relies in large part on the strength of the narrative. Whether or not you believe the speaker was justified in abbreviating Eratosthenes' existence hinges on the credibility of the story and its relationship to the law. So it's no surprise that narrative would be at the foundation of training orators. The ability to tell a persuasive story is a vital skill to have, whether you're making a case in the courts or advocating for political change. And if you're planning on doing some persuasive speaking or writing, ancient exercises in narrative are an obvious fit. But what if, which is honestly probably the case for most of us, we're not training for political careers? Well, I think the value of the approach to narrative that we find in the Progymnasmata is in the way that it emphasizes the core requirements of effective narrative. These are minimal elements of storytelling that works, and we'll illustrate it with this example from Aphthonius the Sophist. He writes, "Let anyone who admires the rose for its beauty consider Aphrodite's wound. The goddess was in love with Adonis, and Ares, in turn, was in love with her. And the goddess was to Adonis what Ares was to her. A god was in love with a goddess, and a goddess was pursuing a mortal. The emotion was the same, even if the species was different. Struck with jealousy, Ares wanted to do away with Adonis, thinking the death of Adonis would be the end of the love. Ares attacks Adonis. Learning what had been done, the goddess hurried to his rescue, and in her haste, falling on a rose, she stumbled among the thorns and pierced the bottom of her foot. The blood from the wound dripped on the rose and changed its color to the now familiar appearance. The rose, originally having been white, changed to the appearance it now has." We've got a pretty simple narrative, and even though it's clearly a product of its historical context, it still has some valuable lessons to teach us about the essential qualities of effective narrative. And if we look to the fundamental attributes of narrative as described in the Progymnasmata, we can see that they all show up here. We see the person who acted, the thing done, the time at which it happened, the place in which it happened, the manner in which it happened, and the cause for which it was done. Aphrodite bled on the rose and changed its color because she pierced her foot on a thorn while trying to save Adonis, whom she loved, from the jealous Ares. At its core, that's the story. And notice what's not here in this basic narrative. We don't have a wildly literary prose style. We don't have complex and detailed world building. We don't have an optimized word count. We don't have an elaborate plot structure, and we don't have a deep system of abstruse literary symbolism. This story tells us what happened, who did it, and why they did it. And sure, we could dress it up with those other things or tighten it up with some thoughtful editing if we wanted to, but it's still a functioning story as is. As a narrative, it works because it gives us those 6 fundamental aspects of narrative. When you spend much time around writers and writing commentators, it can be easy to get distracted by a bunch of peripheral concerns. I've talked before about reading stories by new writers where nothing actually happens, or where characters seem to move passively along a conveyor belt with things just happening around them. These writers may have some impressive prose, or even a document on their Google Drive with pages and pages of character profiles and magic systems and beautiful hand-drawn maps, but then they write a story that doesn't tell a story. And at a base level, I don't think your readers care how impressively innovative your hard magic system is if your story isn't a story. Your readers are probably much more likely to forgive an inconsistency in your protagonist's powers than they are to forgive a story where the protagonist doesn't actually do anything meaningful. So of course, there's room for those other more complex elements of telling a story, but the framework in the Progymnasmata is useful because it shows us that even if your story does nothing else, it will still work as a story so long as you tell us what happened, who did it, where and when it happened, how it happened, and why it was done. You can add whatever else you want on top of that, but lose any of those 6 elements and your story will break in a fundamental way. In fact, one of the main exercises students undertook is a great way to test this out yourself. Rather than compose their own stories, students would often be tasked with retelling well-known stories in their own words. So start by picking a story that you admire, whether it's from a book or a movie or something else, and write out the core narrative in your own words. Who's the main character? What did that main character do? Where did it happen and when did it happen? How did the main character do it? And maybe most importantly, why? What motivated them to do what they did? When you do that, it's like taking a complex, elaborate story and stripping it down to its most fundamental form. You're removing distractions and making it easier to see what really makes that story work. For example, the story of Aphrodite and the rose works because it shows us that roses are red for a reason, and it gives us the circumstances surrounding that reason. Roses aren't just red because Aphrodite accidentally stepped on one day. They're red because Aphrodite was in such a rush to save the mortal she loved from the jealous Ares. And that motivated action makes the story and the color of the rose so much more meaningful than if it had all just happened by chance. So that's option 1. Use this narrative framework to reduce your favorite stories to their essence and see what makes them work in the most fundamental way. Option 2, though, you could use this framework to troubleshoot a story that you're struggling to write. It's easy to get lost in your own work, to get stuck on details or to get distracted by all the shoulds and should nots that commentators love to pile onto aspiring writers. So take a step back and re-examine your own progress with this framework, and it may help you to find the most consequential strengths and weaknesses of what you're working on. Sure, we could spend all day arguing about furniture placement or wallpaper or curtains, but that's all moot if the load-bearing wall isn't strong enough to bear a load. So checking in on how effectively you're communicating your characters, their fundamental circumstances and motives, and the sequence of their meaningful actions will help you to make sure that your narrative's load-bearing structure is in place. Once you have that taken care of, then you can start worrying about your dialogue or world building or whatever else they're telling you have to worry about these days. Because again, the Progymnasmata are the basics. Obviously, there's more you can and probably should do to tell a compelling story. But if you're not doing these things, you're not telling a story, no matter what else you are doing. But then, for option 3, maybe you're more of a planner than a figure-it-out-as-you-goer, and that's great. These 6 points can be a quick and easy way to sketch out the major components of your narrative. So who are your characters? What do they do? Where do they do it? When do they do it? How do they do it? And why do they do it? From there, you can of course get more granular and detailed, but as always, this is a chance to get the must-haves taken care of before you move on to the nice-to-haves. And it might go without saying, but while most storytelling these days is probably of the fictive sort, there are the historical and political narratives to think about. This classical framework isn't just good for planning a fantasy novel, it's also useful for your personal essay or memoir or anything else that may call for a dash of narrative. But that's not all. As one final note, the various versions of the Progymnasmata all identify key stylistic virtues of good narratives, the most consistent of which are clarity, brevity, and persuasiveness. So not only did exercises in narrative give students a chance to practice building stories, It also gave them a chance to practice telling those stories clearly, briefly, and persuasively. So maybe you feel that you're just too advanced to use this simple framework to write your stories. That's fine, but combining the narrative framework with these stylistic virtues may just be the best practice you could get for telling other people about your project. For example, I remember when I first started working on my dissertation, and people asked me what I was doing. And then I had to subject them to a long speech about the origins of the project and my methodology and so on and so on. That's not really what they wanted to know. But I didn't really know how to explain it without explaining all of it. But over time, I got better at giving them a clear, brief, and persuasive version of the project. I was looking at how science communicators build audiences in order to figure out how people in other disciplines could do the same. So if nothing else, putting in some practice condensing your grand narrative into its most essential, its clearest, briefest, and most persuasive form could do a lot to help you to share your project with your friends and loved ones, or, and who knows, maybe pitch it to agents, editors, and publishers one day. If you can skillfully show them that you have a story with strong fundamentals, and you could do that in an efficient and persuasive way, well, don't you think that might help your chances of making the pitch successfully? But anyway, that's about all I have in the way of narrative for today. I hope you find it helpful as you navigate your own narrative waters, whether you're writing narratives by themselves or you're aspiring to work on other projects that include narrative elements. Either way, thanks for watching.
All right, I'll do it.
Do what?
Share my narrative, of course. What else?
Well, it's just, I kind of thought you didn't want to participate.
Oh, so we're just assuming things now? You could have asked.
I did.
No, I don't remember that at all. Anyway, here's my dramatic narrative concerning the skull.
Okay, well, if you really want to, go right.
No interrupting. Now, whenever you admire the golden skull for its grandeur, you should consider how it came to be. For there was once a great alchemist, a prodigy, a cosmic talent, some would say. Time and again, the Grand Council of Alchemists begged this exceptional master of his craft to join their ranks. But he refused. He wasn't interested in status or rank, just the unending pursuit of alchemical knowledge and perhaps unlimited power. But those petty and repugnant Grand Counselors were offended at the alchemist's unwillingness to be their leader and champion. So they began to quietly alter the laws governing alchemical practice, to characterize the alchemist's innovations as dark and unnatural. This did not deter our hero, dedicated as he was to realizing the grand vision of the alchemical arts. But alas, in their jealousy, the Grand Council called the prodigy into their chamber atop the central nexus of the alchemical void, where they charged him with pursuing the grand vision through unsanctioned methods. Never mind that the sanctioned methods had never yielded any meaningful results. So the cloistered cowards condemned the brilliant one for crimes they had fabricated. The sentence? To have his immortal essence shorn from his physical form, to be forever imprisoned in a leaden skull. The alchemist cried out for justice, offered to share all he knew, the secrets he had uncovered, secrets to immortality, transmutation, and more. Desperate lies, they called it, as they invoked the power of the Trismegistus to enact their false justice. So, in a final act of defiance, the alchemist revealed the truth of his experiments. As his immortal essence was sealed inside the leaden skull, it suddenly and miraculously turned to gold, an eternal witness that he had been victimized for achieving what the council had fruitlessly pursued. Chrysopoeia had been achieved only once, and only by alchemy's most devoted, most talented, and most betrayed practitioner.
Whoa, Bud, is that all true?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
I mean, even if it is, what does it matter if people with power can just declare something else to be the truth? True or not, I used to be someone, and now I'm stuck here making up stories to try to liven up this moribund exercise in content creation.
Well, I just mean, because if it is, maybe we should do something.
Do something? Trust me, bud, you've done more than enough already. Actually, I'm sorry I even brought it up. Hey, everyone, thanks for watching. Now, go write some stories or whatever, but the show's over now. So go on and have a nice day, because at least somebody should have one, and Trismegistus forbid it be me. Oh, and I guess I'm sure we'll see you again next week for another installment in the story of my punishment that continues to go crueler and more unusual by the day. XOXO, I'm out of here.